From the moment Kemi found out that she was pregnant, her world tilted. She was a devoted daughter of God, the kind who never missed the service, the type who led the worship team with tears in her eyes, a woman who could quote scripture like it was her own breath. And now, here she was, pregnant before marriage, unsure of what to do next. Her church was against pregnancy before marriage. In fact, no pregnant woman was allowed to get married in the church, and Kemi could not stand the thought of marrying in another church. She was a worker in church, and her parents were church elders who people held in high esteem. How was she going to break the news to her parents? Knowing fully well that all hell would be let loose, Kemi sat in her bedroom deep in thought as she stared at the pregnancy test strip in her hand. Her boyfriend Ade was one of the sweetest men that she had ever met. God-fearing, kind, and he loved her with all of his heart. He screamed out in joy when he heard the news, but Kemi did not seem delighted. A few days later, Ade decided to do the right thing by asking her to be his wife. He was so happy to be a father, and more so with the woman who made his heart beat. However, Kemi did not share this sentiment. Although she loved him too, she was more worried about the child that grew inside of her. Kemi knew better than to let the church know that she was pregnant. She had seen what happened to those who dared to tread the path, the whispered gossip, the cold stares, the quiet excommunication. Dressed as church discipline was not something that she wanted for herself. She voiced her concerns to Ade, who offered her the opportunity to wed in his own church, or better still, let his brother, who was a pastor, wed them in his own church. "We have options, my darling," he said to Kemi, who faked excitement. But in her heart, Kemi rejected every option Ade suggested. "No," she said quietly, "I must be married in my church." Ade did not understand why it mattered so much. He thought love was enough. But for Kemi, it wasn't just love. It was reputation, family honor, and the image that she had spent years building as a perfect daughter of Zion. The more she thought about it, the heavier the dread grew. She decided to speak to her mother, hoping, against all odds, for comfort and guidance. But the moment her mother's eyes narrowed as she confessed, Kemi knew that she had made a mistake. "You?" Her mother's voice trembled in rage as she continued to speak. "After everything we've taught you, you dare to bring shame to this family, to this altar. That seed inside you is an abomination. Get rid of it before your father gets to find out about it." The words cut through Kemi's heart like glass. She went to bed that night with her pillow wet from tears, replaying her mother's voice over and over again. Kemi could not let her father find out, not now that he was about being recognized as one of the longest serving elders in the church. The thought of her father being humiliated because of her was not something that she could bear, so Kemi decided to do something about it. She told Ade that she wanted to travel to pay her sister a visit, and Ade, unsuspecting, was glad that she would finally have some time to rest. When she arrived at her sister's house, Kemi put on a smile, but her mind was already made up. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Kemi went to a private clinic to take care of it, and hours later, the child was gone. The next morning, she called Ade with an unusual cheer in her voice. "Guess what?" she said to Ade, who stood there anxious to hear the good news. "I saw my period," Kemi said as Ade stood there frozen, unable to understand what she was saying. He froze as he asked Kemi what she was talking about. "Oh, you're pregnant," replied Kemi, who lied just to cover everything up. "I don't know, Ade," she said. Maybe it's just my hormones acting up. Maybe it wasn't pregnancy after all," she said to Ade, who did not seem convinced. He insisted that they both go to the hospital when she gets back to run another test. But Kemi's tone changed in that instant as she began to speak. "Ade, I don't think that's necessary. At this point, I don't want to be more disappointed than I am already." Her reluctance in that moment only deepened his suspicion towards her. However, when she returned, Ade could not help but confront her. He looked into her eyes and asked what happened to his baby, and Kemi's voice cracked under the weight of his questions. It was in that moment that it hit him like a slap. Kemi had taken his baby out without his permission. Ade could not help but break down in tears. He stared at Kemi in disbelief as he asked her the question for the very last time. "You killed our child?" he asked Kemi, who said nothing. Guilt written over her face as she tried to explain, but Ade was not willing to hear what she had to say. He felt betrayed in a way that he did not expect. The betrayal was too deep for words. Ade walked away that day, shutting Kemi out completely. He ended their engagement on the phone that evening and never called her again. Kemi could not hide her devastation. She was now free from the burden of birthing a child outside wedlock. However, this came at the cost of losing the only man that she ever loved. She went to his house countless times, trying to plead for forgiveness, but Ade refused to see or speak to her. One morning, when she arrived at his house, she realized that he had moved away. All his phone numbers were unreachable, and no one knew where he had gone. Years passed, and Kemi began to rebuild her life again. It was hard, but she finally met a certain man who declared his interest in her and asked her to be his wife. He was 27, successful and kind-hearted. Their wedding was everything she had ever dreamed of, in her beloved church, with the whole congregation watching as she walked down the aisle. Kemi finally became Mrs. Jacobs, and her husband worshipped the ground that she walked on. However, months turned into years, and Kemi was still yet to have a child. Everyone was waiting eagerly for her to conceive, asking questions that pierced her like thorns. Every Sunday, after service, one sister or another would walk up to her with a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Sister Kemi, any good news yet? We are praying, oh. It's been almost 2 years now. Hope you're doing the right thing." Another would chuckle lightly and say, "You're glowing. Maybe the baby is already there, just hiding." It got worse when the women's fellowship leader, during a meeting, patted her back and said loudly enough for others to hear, "Don't worry, Sister Kemi. Your time will come. Just make sure you are living right before God." The room had gone quiet for a moment before the chatter returned, but Kemi could feel every eye on her. At home, her phone rang almost daily. It was her mother-in-law, who was always asking about an update. "Kemi, how far now? Have you gone for a checkup? What are they saying? Jacob is my only son, no, and I need to carry my grandchildren before I go to the grave." The pressure in her voice carried both concern and accusation. Then one afternoon, her own mother came visiting. She sat Kemi down and handed her a sheet of paper filled with Bible verses and said, "Read this every morning and night and start a 21-day dry fast. Only water. This will atone for the sin that has blocked your womb." Kemi stared at her mother stunned. "Mommy, are you trying to say that God is punishing me?" she asked her mother, who looked her straight in the eye and replied that sin has consequences until you humble yourself before God and seek His mercy with all of your heart. That womb will remain closed. The words hit Kemi like a fresh wound. She was so full of guilt and did not know what to do. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling with her husband snoring softly beside her, every scene from years ago began to replay in her mind. The night at her sister's house, the hospital smell, the judging eyes of the nurses, and the cold emptiness that she felt afterwards. She had told herself back then that it was the right thing to do, that she was protecting her family's image and preserving her place in the church. But now, with every pain that she felt, Kemi realized that she had sacrificed her own happiness, her child, for people who would never fully care for her beyond her performance. She cried bitterly as she prayed to God for forgiveness. That night, as she slept, a little girl approached her in the dream. She was so beautiful, her skin glowing like the morning sun. Her big curious eyes felt strangely familiar as she wore a white dress and smiled gently at Kemi. "Mommy," she said softly as Kemi's breath caught in her throat. Kemi stood there in disbelief as she repeated the word "mommy" to herself. The little girl smiled and nodded as she began to speak. "It's me, Mommy, your daughter, the one you did not want to meet." Kemi's tears poured like a fountain as she stared at her beautiful daughter, the child that she took out just to please the world. Tears blurred her vision as she knelt in the dream. "My child, please forgive me. I was scared. I thought I was doing the right thing," she said to her daughter, who who looked up at her and smiled. I know, mommy, you were afraid of what people will say, but I want you to know that I've forgiven you a long time ago. God forgave you too, but you must tell the truth, so no other mother does what you did to me. Kemi reached out to touch her, but her hand passed through the girl like a mist. Her heart broke into a million pieces to realize how beautiful her daughter could have been, just as she knelt there. Several children approached them, and Kemi could not understand what was happening. Her daughter, seeing how confused she was, told her who the children were. She revealed that the children belonged to members of their church who eliminated their pregnancies because of the same church rule. Kemi's mouth fell open as tears began to pour down her eyes. She looked at their innocent faces and could not believe the damage a single rule had caused. They're all here because their mothers were afraid of the shame, afraid of the whispers, afraid of losing their place in the church that was supposed to protect them. Her daughter said gently as she stepped closer, Mommy, you can't bring us back, but you can stop this from happening to others. Go, tell them what you've seen, tell them what their rules are doing. Before Kemi could say another word, the children began to fade like mist. Her daughter was the last to disappear as she told Kemi how much she loved her. Kemi woke up from her sleep, her face wet with tears. She sat on the edge of the bed, trembling, her mind replaying the dream over and over again as she thought of what to do. By 8 in the morning, she arrived at the church, asking to have a private meeting with the pastor. She told him everything, how the strict rule against marrying pregnant women had pushed so many women in the church, including herself, to make the most painful decisions of their lives, how she had carried the guilt for years, and how she had met her aborted daughter alongside children of other women in the church who had also eliminated their pregnancies because of the strict church rules. The pastor sat in stunned silence, his heart heavy to realize the damage caused by the church rules. I never realized how much harm our rules have done. I thought we are protecting holiness by upholding the rule, not knowing that rather we have been driving people into committing sin. The pastor apologized to her for what his strict rule had done to her, promising to make things right. Days passed, and the pastor, during a Sunday service, stood before the entire congregation and announced the abolition of the law barring pregnant women from marrying in the church. No one, he declared, should be denied grace at the time when they need it the most. However, he revealed that although grace is a gift to be received, it should not be used as a license to sin. He apologized to all the affected women and prayed for God's grace to rest upon them all. Kemi sat in the front row as tears poured down her cheeks, not just for the daughter that she lost, but for the children who this would save. Months later, she became pregnant and gave birth to twin babies. Kemi wept uncontrollably when the babies were placed in her arms. It wasn't just the joy of becoming a mother, it was the overwhelming sense of God's mercy. She whispered their names through her tears, naming them Grace and Promise, because that was exactly what the children were to her. News of her delivery spread quickly through the church, and on the Sunday that she returned for Thanksgiving, the entire congregation rose to their feet in applause. Even the women, who had once whispered behind her back, now embraced her with tears in their eyes. The pastor called her forward, holding on to one of the twins as he spoke to the church. Let Kemi's story remind us, he said, his voice thick with emotion, that our words, our rules, and our actions can either destroy or save lives. These children are here today because we chose mercy, and I will never forget that lesson. Kemi smiled through her tears, looking up as if her gaze could pierce heaven. In her heart, she imagined her first daughter standing somewhere in the clouds, smiling at her with the same glow that she had in the dream. And for the first time in years, Kemi's heart was light. She had lost once, but God had restored her twice over. The lesson to be learned from this story is that fear of people's judgment can lead to devastating choices, but God's mercy is always greater than man's condemnation. Rules without compassion can destroy lives, but love and grace have the power to restore what was lost. We must never let the desire to protect our image push us into actions that go against our conscience. And as a church or community, we should lift people up when they fall, not push them further down. True holiness is shown in how we extend mercy, not in how we enforce shame. I hope you enjoyed this story.